Good afternoon and welcome to each of you. My name is John Merkel, and along with teaching theology here at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, I also direct the J. Phillips Center for Interfaith Learning, which is the sponsor for this afternoon's program, along with or in cooperation with the Collegeville Institute. And I'm happy to welcome all of you and to introduce the J. Phillips, one of the J. Phillips Center's student interfaith leaders, Danica Simonet, who is going to be hosting the program today. There you go. So I'll say a few words about Danica and then turn it over, and she will introduce the two monks before she begins to ask them some questions. And then after she asks them questions for as long as she would like, then she'll open it up for you to raise questions or give other kinds of responses as well. Danica has been working with the J. Phillips Center since the first semester of her junior year. She's now a senior. She majors in German and in peace studies, and she has a special concentration in forced migration. And she, along with being a student interfaith leader with the J. Phillips Center, she is also co-director of the program that so many of you know about, Extending the Link. And she and her team will be bringing this year's project to fruition when, Danica, at the end of April?
April 25th.
April 25th, so a plug-in for April 25th for Extending the Link. So you take over, Danica. I want to say that it's just been a delight to have Danica working with the J. Phillips Center with me for the last 3. Now this is the 4th semester, and I'm going to miss you a lot, but at least we have a few more months together, and I have so much esteem for Danica and also for Redate Lewy, who also works with the J. Phillips Center. And together we have events like this, but we also facilitate smaller scale events as well, reading groups and visits to mosques and synagogues and to the Hindu temples. So keep in touch and we'll keep you informed about what we're doing. Danica, it's all yours.
Thank you all so much for coming, and if this is one of your first J. Phillips events, thank you especially for your openness to come learn about new faiths and new world views. As Dr. Merkel was saying, feel free to follow us on Facebook and follow our emails, as there will be more programming events throughout the semester. And now I have the honor of introducing two inspiring, compassionate, amazing monks. First, I will start with Ajahn Jotipālo, who is a Theravada Buddhist monk of Abhayagiri, is that correct? Buddhist monastery in Redwood, California, since 1998. And he also stayed at Theravada Buddhist monastery in Thailand, Canada, and New Zealand. Ajahn Jotipālo also graduated from Wabash College in his home state of Indiana. After graduating from Wabash College, Jotipālo worked in sales for 6 years and on staff at the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts before becoming a monk. Ajahn Jotipālo has also been involved in interreligious dialogue with Benedictines and other Christians for many years. Besides these experiences, Jotipālo is now a resident scholar this academic year at the Collegeville Institute, where he is working on a project titled Where Can Buddhist Artistic Traditions Learn from Christian Iconography? So please give a warm hand for Ajahn Jotipālo. And to my right, we have Father Michael Peterson. Father Michael Peterson has been a Benedictine monk since 1996, where he was first affiliated with Blue Cloud Abbey in Marvin, South Dakota, until its closing in 2012, where he transferred his monastic vows to St. John's Abbey. Father Michael Peterson is also the Abbey's Oblate Director and a sacramental chaplain at the College of St. Benedict. Father Michael is also the chair of the Board of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue, a group of Benedictine and Cistercian monastics engaged in interreligious dialogue with members of other religions, especially with Buddhist monks and nuns. Father Michael also regularly leads retreats and conferences, and he serves in many pastoral assignments to the Diocese of St. Cloud. So please give a warm welcome to Father Michael Peterson. Great. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, of course. My first question is to you, Jotipālo. I know that in the Buddhist tradition, it is stated that the root of compassion is listening. I was wondering if you could speak about why is listening considered the foundation of compassion, and if you could speak a bit about what it means to be a good listener in the Buddhist tradition.
Right. I was last night reading an email from a friend of mine who is a chaplain, a kind of Buddhist chaplain in New Zealand, and she wrote this line that I thought summed it up kind of beautifully too. And she said, "How can we look out for each other if we're not looking at each other?" And so it kind of feels like the same thing. It's like with listening, it's like getting out of our own ideas and concepts of where the other person is coming from. But just to be able to be there and to listen to what their concerns are, what their what their worldview would be, and just to be able to take that in. Because I think if we come from our own perception or our own agenda in a conversation with somebody, no matter what the conversation's about, we're always cut off from that person. Mm-hmm. And so it needs to, I think, start from that aspect of listening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And then, Father Michael, I know that the rule of St. Benedict begins with the word listen and emphasizes the importance of listening with the ear of our heart. Is there a direct link between listening and compassion in the rule of St. Benedict?
Listen is the first word in the rule of St. Benedict, and you can see the big word listen right in the back, that big piece of art. So it must be fairly important if we're going to stick that word on our wall. The rule continues, listen, my son, my daughter, to the master's instructions and attend to them with the ear of your heart. This is from a father who loves you. And that listening with the ear of the heart, those words coming in the ear and going directly really deep within us. And I guess for the ancient peoples, the heart not only meant the affective or the feelings, but really the whole person. And so the rule continues, this is from a father who loves you. The master is really God in the person of Jesus Christ. So that listening and compassion begins with God who first loves us. The rule opens with, I'm God, I love you. These are the ways that will make your life free and better. So listen. Listen to what I really want for your life. A story of my novice master back at Blue Cloud, Father George, who was a very kind of gentle person. Towards the end of the prologue, it said, as you progress in this way of life, following the ways of God, you will run on the way of God's commands, your heart swelling with the inexpressible delight of love. And I said to Father George, swelling with the inexpressible delight of love, is Benedict putting us on kind of a cell treatment to get you in the door, or is it real, this inexpressible delight of love? And with a nice southern accent, Father George said, Michael, if you give your life to others, and you let others give their life to you, your life can be beautiful. So that listening and compassion, I think, begins with ultimately the call of God's love on our own life, and then following that way in love.
Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. Ajahn Jotipālo, can you share some practices that have been especially helpful to you in the cultivation of being a better listener? What suggestions could you give to our audience here of how they could become better listeners and thus more compassionate individuals?
Right. So from what Father Michael said about, sort of the love coming from God, reminds me of the word Buddha itself. This kind of shows a difference, maybe a little bit of the way Buddhists kind of would contemplate the world versus a Christian or some other religions. And so with Buddha, the word Buddha, if anybody doesn't know what that word means, it's actually not his name. Gautama was his name. But the word Buddha means to be awake. And so I found that that's sort of like, we have listen written there on the back of the wall. That's for a Buddhist, that's the primary objective, is to be awake. And what are we awakening to? It's to life. It's like, how do I feel right now in this moment? Like, am I nervous? Am I afraid? I'm not, but just to know that. And so it's like with compassion, Danica and I were talking earlier last week about, certain situations in the world, and when you see somebody being discriminating against, or someone who is discriminating, it's like she's asked, well, how can you be compassionate for that? And I was like, well, no, you need to come back, and how do you feel? What's your emotion? What are you dealing with? And so if it's, you start to, it's that you're angry or that you're closed off, it's like, from a Buddhist perspective, what the meditation does is we tune in more and more and more into actually our own emotions, our own feelings. And then if there is any potential to reach that other person, it's because we're coming from love, not from trying to force our will on them or try to shame them into feeling a different way. So a lot of the meditation techniques we do are really just geared towards that, to sort of try to quiet the mind, try to quiet our emotional states, so we can actually really be aware of what's there. And then that's also why we call it a practice, meditation practice, is because it's like an attitude we have to have, or a worldview we have to have. It's like, I want to be someone who's compassionate. And so so in terms of like meditation techniques, with the word compassion, it's one of, I actually think it's like part of 4 different practices altogether called the Brahma Viharas. And Brahma is like a godly state, and so Vihara is an abiding. So like if we really want to be emotionally in a state of, almost godliness or holiness, you have to be in one of these 4 states of mind, which is, I won't give you the Pali, I can tell you later if you want to, but it's basically goodwill, compassion, joy at other people's good fortune, and equanimity. And so they're often taught as 4 completely separate meditations, but they actually, my understanding of how it works for me anyway, is that you need to have all 4 of them together, plus wisdom. And so it's the word compassion is actually it's a subset of the goodwill, or loving kindness is often what's translated. So if it's like loving kindness, if compassion is just goodwill or compassion towards all beings, it's Michael was telling me that this is the same in the Christian tradition, is that when you have that sort of feeling of goodwill or compassion, when you're developing it, it's like the rain. The rain falls everywhere. It's like you're not pinpointing, like, I want this person to be happy, but not that one. It's just when you are in a state of goodwill, it permeates everything that you do, and it affects everybody. So just very quickly here, then in terms of meditation, there are various meditation techniques that you can do. And oftentimes it's just repeating very simple phrases and just really trying to keep those almost like a mantra in our head. And just sort of through repeated action, it becomes a habit. And there are very specific ways to do it. Like, I really feel like it's not just repeating the phrases, but I use my imagination, being a visual artist. And so I will imagine, if I'm doing a particular person, I will try to imagine that person happy. Like, if I'll know something about them, like what makes that person happy. And I'll actually try to evoke that emotion in my physical body. And if you do it long enough, like over years, you can actually just even say the word happy, and it'll bring up that physical emotion in your body. And so I use 4 phrases when I do that type of meditation: is, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, and may I live with ease. And so each 4 of those has a completely different feeling in my body. So like, I know what it feels like to be safe. So when I meditate on that, I actually really try to imagine situations where I can feel that safety or where I would need that safety and bring it up. And so it's like you're just training yourself to come back to that emotion. And so it'd be the same with compassion. So it's like with loving kindness or goodwill, you're doing that towards everybody. But then compassion is really towards somebody else's suffering or a group of people suffering. So then you bring that up.
Oh, thank you so much. And Father Michael, have you found any practices helpful in cultivating your skill as a listener?
It's doing a lot of campus ministry or just speaking with people. I'm honored and privileged to hear people's stuff a lot. And I found some just simple techniques of listening. Start with not judging, just hearing. Another would be not fixing, not trying to fix that person. And then just listen probably about 70 or 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. That would probably be more with kind of pastoral ministry or listening to a friend who's going through some tough stuff, not judging, not fixing. I find that a good meal helps too with listening. Just a story back in my former monastery at Blue Cloud Abbey was about 9 o'clock at night. Everything was dark. And suddenly I heard down from the hallway where our parking lot was this sounds of an angry voice. It was an angry man coming down the hallway, closer and closer. And I was getting some coffee or tea or whatever I was doing, and my first instinct was to call the cops or to run. And so I was just kind of frozen there. Our Father Thomas Rosnowski was around. He bypassed me, went down the hallway, and I heard, "Hi, I'm Father Tom. Are you hungry?" And then here comes angry man, and Father Tom went past me. I was looking at him. They went to the refrigerator, got some food, microwaved it, and then they sat down together. And I left, and I came back in about 45 minutes to see if Father Tom was still alive. And they were both laughing. Angry man had turned into a happy man or laughing man, and the man said, "Yeah, thanks, Father, I needed that." Mm-hmm. And then Tom said, "I needed that also." So there kind of a wonderful courage to enter somebody's space and to listen, to bring out some food to kind of make things a little easier. And then for me, another phrase when Tom said, "I needed that also," of a listening, of mutuality, of sharing your life with another person, of welcoming somebody into your spaces, not as somebody who can help or to fix, but to really be with, like the word compassion, to suffer with, to be present with. I like your meditation on wishing people happiness. That's a practice I picked up from you or another Buddhist practitioner, but when I meet somebody, a stranger, I don't always do this, but I find that letting my kind of default way of encountering that person or meeting that person is I wish that person happy. Mm. And happy not in any other sense than just that, not happy and they should be happy because they do this, or they should be happy because they change this, but just happy. I think it lets down your guard or your force fields or your resistance to really listening or being with another person. I just wish you happy.
Yeah. Listening to Father Michael here, it's like, I think another really important, our way to develop that skill of listening is to hearing stories like this. that you hear that, and then the next time you're in a similar situation, these things will pop into your head. So I had Danica read a short booklet on compassion before we met a couple of weeks ago about this encounter tonight. And one of the stories there was this woman who was a student of this man, and they were both on a meditation retreat. I forget exactly what happened, but at the end of the retreat, she was really emotional and felt like she was a failure, and she was sitting down at the lunch table, and she was sitting there, and he saw her from across the room, and he took his lunch tray and came and sat next to her and didn't say a word. But she said later, she says, just him coming, seeing that she was in pain, and just, letting her know that she was there, that really calmed her down and gave her that strength to be with her emotions. But then later, her sister was having extremely difficult childbirth, and was in extreme pain, and she wouldn't let anybody even hardly even in the room, and was in a lot of pain. And for some reason, she was on the floor of the room that she was in, and she did let her sister in. And she said she remembered that encounter of being at the meditation retreat. And so she said she just laid down on the floor next to her sister, didn't touch her, didn't say a word to her, didn't try to comfort her, didn't try to talk her out of what she was feeling, but just was there. And then her sister later told her that was the most powerful thing that ever happened to her in her life. So it's that's listening.
This is kind of another story about listening. So I was in Bella Cucina at St. Joe maybe last year, and I think I was eating with Sister Sharon, who's my boss at campus ministry at CSB. And we just got done eating, and I saw two tables. One table was a Benny and a Johnny, and the other table was a Benny and Johnny. And then I noticed the first table on their cell phones. I'm not sure if it was a first date and they were uncomfortable and they were defaulting to their screens. I went, oh, that's not a very good date. and then the second table, oh my, they were just gushing over each other. And so I think that the other person has a face and a life. And I think sometimes that, I don't mean to sound like an old codger, but I think that screen can become this kind of wall between us. So that can be an inhibition towards deeper encounters, especially if you're going to have some pasta and wine and you're on a date, huh? So I would just, that's my impression.
What do monks know about dating? They don't
It's been a long time.
It seems that with listening to these stories or going into these spaces, it's really essential that people have a strong sense of inner peace or inner compassion. In Jotipālo, I know meditation is obviously very emphasized in the Buddhist tradition. What does meditation have to do with inner peace, with the cultivation of inner peace? And what are the most common obstacles people have or you yourself have had with meditation, and how can those obstacles be overcome?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I talked a little bit about it with that practice of the Brahma Viharas, how that practice works. I think in general, just about meditation in general, it's like the way I kind of talk about meditation is that a lot of it's like getting out of our way, and so one of the meditations we do is what's called the five khandhas, and so it's like if you break down what a human being is, it's like we're our physical body and we're our minds, and so if you look at the mind, it's like it's consciousness, it's hadn't planned on talking about this, so it's not fresh in my mind, but it's like, thoughts and emotions, the thinking process, the feelings. And feelings isn't emotions, but it's like pleasant, unpleasant, and painful. So just knowing how we're physically feeling that way. And so a lot of what the meditation to me is slowing down. So we oftentimes just use the breath, just going to something extremely neutral, something simple that's always there. So you're developing concentration by being able to stay with that one object for a long period of time. And what you'll find when you start doing that is that the mind does think. There's always thoughts coming through. But we start learning how to not pick them up. You know, so it's not, we're not trying not to think, we're actually just trying not to pick up the thoughts and the views and opinions that are coming through. And eventually, if you get good at it, because you don't pick them up, they actually stop coming. And so, but it's not the goal of the meditation, but it's just to develop that training. And so then we start looking at all the sort of what I call the khandhas. We start looking at them, and we start breaking them down. It's like if you look at a feeling, so like something that's unpleasant that's happening, we'll have a tendency to think that this is permanent, this is who and what I am. But you start looking at it, you start seeing that it changes. There's fluctuations, that it's always moving. And so like my teacher would say, if you're angry, like, okay, well just sit there and set a timer and just, you know, tell yourself you're going to be angry for the rest of the day. You know, and it's like, you can't do it because it's impermanent. It's always changing. And so over a long period of time, when you start to notice all these, that everything is changing, and that you start to get it, that it's not personal, it's not self. And so then when anger does arise, you just sort of, oh, hi friend, anger. You know, it's like, I see you, but I choose not to pick you up. You know, last time you burnt me, so I'm not gonna play with you today. And I was telling Danica last week too that I did this practice where monastic form, especially in the Buddhist form, I'm sure it's similar in the Benedictine, but when you come to the monastery, you take on a lot of precepts, a lot of rules, and one thing that they do is it gives you a fence. It actually sort of, it's a protection and gives you a sort of sense of this is sort of like wholesome places for your mind to be. And so a lot of people think it's really repressive and bad to have rules, but they can actually be quite helpful. And but when I got to the monastery, I remember I was in a stressful situation. There was like 10 of us cleaning this kitchen that was like 10 foot by 10 foot. And I just felt really like claustrophobic. And so I got in one corner and I was just cleaning one section of the stove. And all of a sudden this desire for a donut appeared in my head. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is how I've lived my entire life. Like whenever I'm in aversion to something, I can just go and get something pleasant. I can go watch a movie. I can go to just get what I want. And so being in the monastery just cut that off. And so that's one way, like I had to listen to what I was actually feeling. I had to, confront it instead of just satisfying those feelings. And then, so what happened for me, unfortunately, is probably my underlying tendency for me was I was an angry person. And I didn't know that because I was able to suppress it. And so when I was in the monastery for the first year, I was really angry. It was just always biting people and verbally and stabbing them in the back and stuff. And so I took on this practice of whenever I knew that I acted on an intention that was not wholesome, especially sort of with anger, I determined that I would ask for forgiveness from that person. And and I set a bunch of rules for myself. So like as part of a Buddhist monastic rules is that if I want to tell somebody something about their personality or admonish them for breaking a rule or something, I have to ask permission from that person. So it kind of honors that person and it gives them the opportunity to say, I'd like to hear it, but not right now. I'm in a bad mood myself. And so it creates the safety. So I had decided rules like I had to tell about very specific things that happened, not generalities. I had to be honest. I had to make sure that my intention was not to like blame that person, but to really ask for forgiveness, and had to ask for the right time. So I took this on for an entire year, and what became really obvious after a while, after a few months, was this really shocked me. Was I would go up to somebody and say, okay, I said something to you this morning. I'd like to apologize. When's a good time for you? And they said, well, go ahead, what happened? And I'd explain it to them. And they listened to me 50% of the time. I'm not joking. I would say, well, you did this, and and I reacted negatively. And they go, that's really odd that you mentioned that because you don't realize this, but right before you came into the room, I yelled at somebody else for the exact same thing. I was like, what? And hearing this over and over and over again, I started realizing that it's like anger or any emotion, it has its own life. It's like I would walk into a room and there would maybe been a fight and I would pick up on the energy of that anger and I would think, I'm angry. And so then I would, I'd just look around, what are you doing with your notebook open? I'm talking, and then blast somebody, and And then, so I started realizing that, no, it's like, when I am awake to how I'm feeling, then I can choose to follow that or not. And then really getting at this emotion isn't me anyway. And so I can set it aside.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Father Marco, I know prayer is greatly emphasized in the Benedictine tradition. Do you see prayer as fostering compassion? Or do you think there's a distinction between prayer and meditation?
Well, I think I'll just respond to the first topic of prayer. As Benedictines, we have, of course, individual prayer all the time, and our individual prayer really nurtures and sustains our communal prayer. So at St. John's and as well as St. Ben's, we get together 4 times a day generally for communal prayer. And it's just a very beautiful and wonderful thing to be together as brother monks with our guests. It's a compassionate act for one another just to be together, just to kind of show up and support one another in our prayer life. Most of our prayers are really about singing or reciting the Psalms. So the Psalms are that part of the Old Testament, which are the prayer forms predating the person of Christ and was Christ's own probably main prayer form. And in these Psalms really contain the whole genre of human emotion. You'd almost want Psalms to be very pleasant, like, God, you're great, awesome, the sky, the stars. I have 150 Psalms of those, but a lot of times they're full of questions, angers, doubts, joys, hopes. And to pray those ancient Psalms is a really honest way of prayer. I think prayer, if it's going to be in relationship with God, has to be honest. We can't put up a show or try to look spiffy before God. Just lay it out. So being in touch with those emotions in the Psalms is a way of, I think, getting in touch with other people and their own need for compassion. Because when I'm praying the Psalms with my brother, it's just not me and I'm doing my thing, but it's as a body of brothers praying for the world, offering those real human emotions up, somehow that God would bless, redeem, heal those emotions. Part of our praying together also is really self-compassion. That we can come together as a community, whatever kind of work we do, even though it's kind of crazy and busy, just to set that aside and being kind of, holding that work loosely enough where we can just kind of let it go and then come and be nourished by the presence of one another and in that encounter with God. I think one of our prayers at day prayer says something like, God, we thank you for this moment of rest which nourishes us. So communal prayer is a way of self-compassion also, to just, after a busy day of whatever goes on in the morning, to come at 12 o'clock with the rest of my community and to be fed by the presence of one another and by the divine.
Thank you. Father Marco, you talked about self-compassion, and my next question is for both of you. And it probably comes from my major as a peace studies major, but many people in this major or that are in service or the humanities as a whole come in as compassionate individuals and are listening a lot and seeing the suffering, hearing the suffering of the world. And one thing that can occur is compassion fatigue. And I was wondering how both of you, what ways or practices you have seen or advice you would give for individuals to overcome compassion fatigue.
Do you want to go first?
It's really within the Jewish and Christian tradition. And we're talking about fatigue, whether it's bodily or emotionally or whatever. The cure for fatigue is rest. So within the Jewish and Christian tradition, within certainly the Benedictine tradition, there's a strong notion of Sabbath, of just having a day off where you can feed yourself through the company of others, you can nurture whatever gives you life, to put aside kind of the concerns of the day, and just being with that which gives you life, one another, with the presence of God, to recharge the batteries. There's a lot of, even though Sabbath might be a real old-fashioned word to some of us, I think there's a real movement among the world of technology and business and society to reclaiming the idea of Sabbath, even though maybe not even if you're maybe secular or agnostic or atheist, just a very human thing of just rest. Some people have kind of called for maybe a Sabbath rest for one's phones and computers, so you're unplugged from the concerns of the world. One of the things that helped me at times, because I can get very serious and filled with people's needs and the world that kind of is crazy once in a while, to just learn to laugh once in a while. So that notion of humor is related to the same root word as to be of the earth, of humility. And to laugh is kind of at oneself, is to recognize the dignity of our human imperfections. And just not laughing at the world, but just, as Thomas Merton once said, I take life seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. It's a famous line of Pope John the 23rd, right after the Second Vatican Council, when there's a lot of stirrings in the church. And he said, God, it's your church, I'm going to bed. So I think rest also, just to somehow lay aside those concerns on your pillow. I think also the tool of gratefulness. Sometimes that compassion weaken and wanting to help and change the world, which young people are really geared towards. Thank you very much. But just the power of gratefulness. What is not just bad in the world or really wrong, but what am I really grateful about? Brother David Stendhal Rast, a Benedictine, said this once. He said, how to be grateful. He says, well, how do you cross the street? You learned that when you were young. You stop, you look, and you go. So taking moments in your daily life to just stop, even if it's for a little time, to look around to see what you're grateful for. Thank you, grateful. And then go. I remember, I think I was having one of those mornings when the world was really bad. I was at morning prayer, and I closed my eyes and was next to my brothers, and I just did the stop, look, go, just grateful. And I stopped and waited for a little bit, and I could smell something. My brother to my left, Brother John, who works at the fire department, smelled like axle grease. Father Lou, to my right, who works at the Abbey wood shop, smelled like wood shavings. And I said, those are very good Benedictine smells. I was grateful for my brothers, and the support and that kind of odd moment of gratefulness lifted my soul a little bit, and then I kind of got giggled a little bit because I thought that was kind of funny, and humor and gratefulness helped.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for like compassion fatigue, I totally agree with you that rest and humor help, developing those. I think one thing is from a Buddhist perspective with the word compassion, and so from Father Michael and I were talking about this, is that the Greek word or the Latin, compassion means to suffer with, and so from a Buddhist perspective, I was mentioning the Brahma Viharas, these heavenly abodes. they really are these states of mind that are like almost blissful, like when you're in them. And so the notion of compassion to be suffering is totally antithetical to Buddhist sort of belief, or not belief, but just sort of if you really got to the core of the practice. And so, like with compassion, I think oftentimes the burnout from it can happen because we suffer. Like when we're in a situation, when we put ourselves in a situation to help other people, we are putting ourselves in that, in that emotional state, with other people. But there is a way to be able to come into it where it's a very wholesome mind state, the goodwill. And so, it's, like I said, it's a subset of loving kindness. So if we can keep that as our primary objective, is to come into it with trying to help or to be compassionate, but it's not to suffer. And so I think sometimes that gets in the way of the emotion. The other thing too is that we didn't talk about, you actually asked it earlier in another question about the drawbacks or what people find difficult with meditation, is that be the same thing, is that we oftentimes will sit down because we want to have a peaceful mind, or we don't want to be stressed out during final exam week. And so I was telling the Mindfulness Meditation Club that I said, I know why half of you are here. It's because you don't want to stress out during the finals. I said, and so it's good that you're starting now, because this is when you do the work, so you're not stressful in April. But what you learn through meditation, or why people get frustrated, is you do go into wanting to quiet mind, or you do want to have this feeling of loving kindness. But then we often, especially it's like developing of goodwill or this loving kindness, is what I found is like you're repeating these phrases, like, may I be safe, may I be happy. And if it really truly becomes a strong desire in you to have those feelings, often just the opposite will arise. So if you want to be happy, but you are doing things even at a subconscious level that are making you unhappy, that's going to come to the consciousness. And so it actually feels very different from what what you want to have. And so it can scare people, so they'll stop doing it, or they don't, as we say, just watch the breath, and your mind wanders off and people get frustrated. So I think, so one thing is that with meditation, the way I've been taught is that we're really, you have those intentions. You have to have the intention, the will to have those, the peaceful mind or coming from a compassionate heart. But we really just need to open up to what is actually there. And so it's like not to be afraid of if we do want to be peaceful, but the mind is really chaotic, or if we want to be compassionate, but actually aversion or anger towards the other person for whatever reason arises. And so that can scare us. And so we just learn to, well, no, this is partly it's self-compassion, but it doesn't even have to even go into compassion. It can just be, this is the way it is. And my teacher in England, he's been a monk for just about 60 years now, and that's his catchphrase. It's like, if you know him, it says, "It's like this," or "This is the way it is." He's just constantly repeating that, just about everything. You're happy? This is the way it is. You're suffering? This is the way it is. You're hungry? This is the way it is. It takes out all the emotion out of it, and I think that can be the emotion, can be the part that wears us out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
My next question is more on the social or community level. Human beings seem to have a tendency to fear people who are not a part of their own group. Currently, we see this fear specifically in relation to immigration, immigrants and refugees. Do you think this fear can be overcome with compassion? What is there in the Benedictine tradition that can address this fear and enable people to transcend that fear by way of compassion? And what is there similarly in the Buddhist tradition?
Yeah.
Benedictine hospitality is really based on not only taking delight in the other, but it's really the belief in the light of our life being very incarnational. What do I mean by incarnational? Incarnation means Jesus Christ or God becoming flesh and lived among us, but not 2,000 years ago, but that Jesus Christ, God, is present with us today. And Benedict his kind of notion of the incarnational spirituality is all over his rule of Christ in the sick, Christ in the abbot, and then specifically Christ in the stranger. And that really comes from the words of Jesus Christ in Matthew 25. I was sick and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. So really, if we do not greet the stranger, we will miss the face of God. But if I welcome the stranger, then the face of God is before me. And the stranger, when he says the stranger, he doesn't put little details, like footnotes. It just says stranger, that other, that person who maybe makes you feel threatened. If you're feeling somehow distant from God in your life, help somebody in need. The doors of heaven will be open to you. So it's really under the obedience of the gospel and the promise of Christ's words of, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Just obedience to the divine will. Simply put. And that stranger, like I mentioned with Father Tom earlier, is not just an anonymous stranger, but a person with a story and a family, a human face. So just on a basic human level, to honor that. In St. Benedict's rule, he says that the monastery should have what's called a porter. So a porter is basically the receptionist, the person at the front door. And that porter's function is to greet the strangers who comes through the door first. That person is the point person for greeting the stranger. And Benedict says that the porter should welcome the stranger with all gentleness and with thanks be to God. So gentleness is just that human default affection towards the other, but then when he says thanks be to God, he's really saying thanks be to God because God is at my door in the stranger. So I think to develop among all of us kind of a porter spirituality, we can be a kind of a fundamental openness to the other, especially ones who make us uncomfortable. Benedict also says in his rule that, you're especially to welcome the poor and the pilgrims. And he says, the rich that come to your door, they already have enough honor. So you don't need to kind of add any honor to that. But those who don't have honor, the poor and the pilgrim, the stranger who comes in your door, give them a special honor because oftentimes they don't have any. So give it to them.
Yeah, so how to accept the other. One of the meditations, reflections that we do every day, at least as a monastic, it's called the 5 subjects for frequent recollection, which is, I am of the nature to age, I am of the nature to sicken, I am of the nature to die.
You have the greatest titles for things.
Yeah. Buddhism is all about lists, and so they're all titled and stuff like that. The Buddha thought it all out really well. So I'm of the nature to sicken. I often think of it as like I haven't. Like aging is unavoidable. So sickness is unavoidable. Death is unavoidable. Everything that I hold dear and that I love will be separated from me, either just through natural things or at death. And then the 5th contemplation is the contemplation of karma. We only have a few more minutes, so I won't get into the whole detail of that. That would take another 2 or 3 hours. But when we contemplate those things, you really start letting go of, say that again, that self-personality, that self-view that we have of ourselves. But at a certain level, it hits you. It's that not only am I of the nature to sicken, so is everybody. Not only am I going to die, but so is everybody. And when you start to really take that in, you actually, the Buddha uses the phrase something like, we are all brothers and sisters in death. And so when you really see that, it can open up the heart to see, you don't see people as other, you see them as, we're all on the same sinking ship. Buddhists are so lively.
Humor.
Exactly. But it's true. So that is one of the ways that we sort of contemplate or see the refugees coming up from South America, or the Syrians trying to get into Europe. We see them as, if we were in that same situation, we would have the same desire for being treated with respect, or to be able to make a living, to be able to survive. And so we realize that they are exactly the same as us.
Thank you both so much. I could ask a million more questions, but I'd like to open it to the audience. There's microphones on both sides. Feel free to ask anything on your heart or mind. Okay.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's really very enriching, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've heard some Buddhists, this is probably directed more to you, Jotipālo. I've heard some Buddhists talk of the Western idea of compassion as being kind of a warm, fuzzy grandmother kind of love. And yet I've heard of some of the Buddhists talk about compassion as being more of a tough love. I mean, I think the word in Sanskrit is upaya. There's a skillful means that one uses when one engages in compassion. Could you talk a little bit about that? Is there kind of a tough love? Is that a part of compassion too?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I've never heard of that exactly, phrased that way, like being a warm, fuzzy. But when we do develop, say, the loving kindness in general, it's the way I've been taught to is like you are trying to bring up the emotion when you're developing it. So it's like whatever works. And so in the West, in the scriptures, it's talked about you start with yourself, and then you develop it to do other people, and it's usually different categories of people. So someone who's a teacher, someone who's neutral, and then someone who's a difficult person. And we found in the West that it's actually difficult for people to start with themselves. It's just too much self-criticism. And so use an inanimate object, use a teddy bear, whatever works to get the emotion going. So in that sense, that's probably where that is coming from. I think with the tough love, it might be that, see, with these the four Brahma Viharas, the last one, which I haven't talked about, is equanimity. And so that's kind of where the wisdom aspect comes in. If you're in a situation where someone is suffering, and we can have goodwill for them, we can wish for them to well, we can even do certain acts that might help them. But if the other person doesn't want to come out of it, maybe they're so self-identified with that pain that they don't want help, or for many reasons why somebody may not be able to receive that. We have to come with equanimity. We have to be able to state that this is the way it is. Like I will try, but this is the way it is. And so that can often come across as being really cold. But there is this wisdom element that comes in. I'll do what I can, and that's tricky because we don't know what we need half the time. How can we know what somebody else needs? So it's always tricky. Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I'm just saying I'm very thankful of this situation and very grateful of being here. And everyone, yeah, pretty much it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We're glad you're here too. Did you have anything to say about that? The compassion being cold or?
Nope.
Nope.
We've had enough cold lately.
Yeah.
May I ask you each a question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so first for our Buddhist guest tonight, I would like you to explain to us how the authority of the Dalai Lama works in relation to setting, the Buddhist mindset. An example that I'm in particularly thinking about is that a few months ago, the Dalai Lama said that Europe belongs to the Europeans, and ergo the refugees need to go home once their time there is done, once they're on their feet again. And what's more is that, does this have anything to do with the context of Tibet being a religious and ethnic minority that is being marginalized?
Yeah, that's a good question. To qualify it is that the tradition I'm from is from Thailand, so we're what's called Theravada Buddhism, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the head of the order of the Vajrayana order. So it's like I'm not in his sphere, but obviously a lot of things he says has a lot of influence in Buddhist worlds. So like how he works in that system is that there are sort of these ecclesiastical orders of who's the most senior monk or sort of has the most authority in it. So that happens in Thailand as well. There's two main sects of Buddhism, and there's representatives from both sects in this council, and they make these political decisions and things like that. So I hadn't heard his comment about the refugees coming there and that they're not European. That kind of surprises me to hear that. But one thing is, I did hear an interview with him, or someone was telling me about an interview or a council that he was in, and it was about anger, and if anger was appropriate. And it was all different religious leaders from all over the world. And this person told me that every single person had some justification for anger, except for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he said, it's always an unwholesome, unskillful emotion, and it always hurts the person that has it. And so it's like for you to have that or acting on that, it's always like the way I look at anger is like, we might get things done or we might be able to force our will in a particular way, but everybody that we burn along the way is going to probably try to get revenge on us. So it's like it's not a skillful way to approach something. And so at the time, which I'm kind of surprised to hear him say this, because what he said at that conference is someone asked him if there was potential for something like world peace or something like that. His response was, I don't even know what I'm having for dinner tonight. How can I know about world peace? And so he said what we need to do is we need to start looking in the world. I guess it was around the situation in Bosnia at the time when this person was being interviewed. And he said what we need to do is, like, if you get two people that are diabolically opposed to each other, and then like that had happened there was that they were separated because of communism and it was suppressed, that then when you take that lid off, there's this underlying aversion and hatred towards people. You take that lid off, it's gonna come to the surface. And he actually said, it's almost like it's too late in that situation because it's been festering for so long. Is what we need to do is we need to look in the world where there's situations where this could be developing. Like where can we actually start laying the causes down for to prevent that from happening in the future. So yeah, I don't know why he said that or about Syrians should go.
If you kicked it back to me, I would say that it would probably have to do with the Tibetans and the fact that Tibet, they have
Want to go
Chinese
back to
moving
their-
in there,
Yeah.
and that threatens the cohesion of the native Tibetan population.
Yes.
And that it's something that you could see happening. Maybe that's his perspective. I'm not sure. That's
Yeah.
why I brought it up.
Yeah.
And then for our Catholic representative, so with all this listening, this dialogue, any one of these words you may pick, is there an end game to all of this? Do you intend on an evangelization of the Buddhist people, or what's going on here?
Yeah, what's going on here?
It's not about friendship, you're wasting your time. It's not about friendship, you're wasting your time. There's no end game. I'm the one who hopes to be converted into the wisdom traditions of whatever. And the Catholic Church is very clear, especially in the Second Vatican Council and Nostra Aetate, that for other religions we are to protect and uphold and promote other religions. So our religions are very different from each other, but also you've heard similarities, and I guess in dialogue, we choose to work together. I mean, I'm firmly a Catholic. The conversion is not a word that's really in my mind here, other than how can I be a better monk by having another monk witness his life and commitment to me.
So if that is the case, then it logically follows that Buddhists are in the church or can attain salvation through the they may go to heaven when they die.
It's a progressing theology.
A progressing theology. So by progressing theology, is that to say that God can change his opinions on things?
You might want theology.
Fairly complex question.
It's progressing.
You are right in saying that is a complex question, but thankfully we have the backs of 2,000 years of tradition on our side to solve these problems. And I don't think that if you look to the past in our tradition, our canon, our rules, if you would find that opinion, I think they would say that it is necessary for the salvation of people who are in Buddhism, that they must convert.
I don't think that's the essential question here. Maybe you both could speak about what you have learned from your interreligious experiences, things like that. What have you learned from each other? Or specifically, if we could bring it back to compassion, if that's okay with you, since the event is on the cultivation of compassion.
Well, what's more compassionate than trying to bring in a group of people into the fold? Is there anything less compassionate than that?
Yeah, we could talk a bit.
Wait a minute. Hold on here. Is this to say? I mean, like you as the Catholic representative here tonight, is this to say that you know, you'd prefer if your friend over there was a Buddhist as opposed to that being a Catholic?
It's not really in our place and time right now. I mean, the Catholic Church theology accepts the salvation of people outside the church, of goodwill, that the salvation of Jesus Christ has reached even beyond the church borders or our declarations of faith into that great compassion of love and mystery which goes beyond all human understanding.
I mean, forgive me for my bastardization of the Latin here, but do the words extra ecclesiam summa so-and-so ring a bell? That is, outside the church there is no salvation? And that being a dogma, to disagree with said dogma, that there would put you in error, and to be in error would make you a heretic.
You know,
And to be a heretic is to be outside of the Catholic Church.
Excuse me, thanks for your participation, but I think Danica is to the point in saying that she would like us to stick with the topic of compassion. And Father Michael has made the good point that actually current Catholic theology does not hold that position, and it hasn't held it for many decades. And even when it was tested prior to the Second Vatican Council, people who held to that literally were denounced as heretics. So even before the Second Vatican Council, if a person held that, everyone outside the Catholic Church was doomed for damnation. But that's not the topic tonight. And certainly, if you look from the Vatican Council onward, the position is the exact opposite of what you're saying, and it is in line with what Father Michael is saying, where in the Nostra Aetate, as you quoted earlier, or you alluded to earlier, that Catholics are charged with the duty to protect, promote, and support other religious traditions. It's right there at the Second Vatican Council. But we're gonna move on now. We have a few more minutes, and there a lot of people here, everybody here gathered to talk about the theme of compassion, and we'll do that. And do you have a question right there behind you?
Well, very quickly, very quickly. I thought this was an open discussion. Where
It is
we're
an
here
open
with the
discussion,
ear.
but no one person should dominate the whole discussion on a topic that wasn't in the agenda.
Well, no, you see. I don't appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's an open mic.
Let's share it. We're community.
With
The next person, you had far more than anyone else. Please, the
Well,
next
that's
person.
because my question wasn't answered at first.
You can continue it with
Well-
the two monks after the event is over. It's not fair to the rest of the participants here.
It's not fair to be kicked off either.
Well,
You can share your questions after.
It's like this. It's like this.
Okay. I just want to say I'm very grateful for this dialogue, and it has really resonated with me. And this isn't a question, it's just you sharing your story on the angry man coming down the hall at you and witnessing Father Tom have that exchange and resulting in some real connections. I really felt that, and thank you.
Sometimes you learn by failure. me not moving and somebody else moving.
Hi. Oh, wow, this is really. I would like to thank you both for being here, and I really appreciated you both sharing your stories and showing how much similarities are shared between both of your traditions. And looking out at the audience, it's wonderful to see such a diversity. I love their students here, but also monastics. And I think that goes to show the community that is supported at these institutions. And I was wondering if you could both talk a little bit about, in a world that tends to spread, at least a Western world that stresses individualism, how we can use communities to better cultivate compassion.
Well, I like what Father Michael said about just the prayer life here as being, meeting 4 times a day, in communal prayer. We do very similar in the Buddhist form, where we meet pre-dawn for an hour. We do chanting for 20 minutes and then meditate for about an hour. And we do the same thing in the evening. So there's that, and then basically everything we do in the monasteries is totally communal. So it's eating together, praying together, meditating together, and working together. Like we have very, very systematic things like that. And I think partly it's like what I find with what a monastery does in the Buddhist form is that it's providing a community for everybody. So it's like the monks, our kind of responsibility is creating a place where it is peaceful and it is quiet. We call it a refuge. The monastery is a refuge for people to come. So during the 9/11, way back in 2001, when that happened, the abbots sat us all down as a community and said, there's going to be a lot of people coming here who are suffering because of this. And they encouraged us. They didn't say you couldn't, but they encouraged us just to listen, not to ask questions, not to sort of, but just to be there for people to express what they were feeling or just to get in touch with it for the first time. So I've always found that that's what community does. It's creating a space where like-minded people can come together, people that just have that space.
It's when St. Benedict has his chapter on calling the brothers to council. He says when you invite the brothers to council, invite everybody. So a council means like a community meeting to discuss something important. He says invite everybody because it is especially among the younger that God speaks. So when you talk about building community, I think we need the young people to maybe show us older individualists how to do it. So I not meaning to hit the tennis ball right back to you, but in a sense where I think Benedict really emphasizes that the Spirit can move through the courage and audacity of young people. And we see that through a lot of political movements, especially for the efforts to for climate change, to be compassionate to the world. Young people are at the at the vanguard, the forefront of that. The Me Too movement to create justice is often justice is really energy comes from the young people. So that's working at the College of St. Benedict. I'm very blessed to work with young people and seeing their energy towards social justice and community building. But I would echo with Jotipālo is just the of sharing your life, meals and prayer. Don't isolate yourself. True treasure is found in imperfect human community. That's I mean, love. It's love will keep us together.
One thing is, is an answer to a different question that was asked that I wanted to get to but didn't. But sort of developing communities. How I was saying, like we are all, brothers and sisters in aging, sickness, and death, and so that's a community right there. Just the humankind or living beings. All living beings, suffer and go through that as well. And so I just lost my train of thought again. Hopefully, I'll come back. But yeah, it's gone.
Thank you both. That was a wonderful
Yeah.
response.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, thank you again. As it's been repeated, thank you again for coming. I have two questions. One of my first questions is, would you two believe, or what is your perspective on the idea that every single religion is praising the same entity? We're just that every culture is made to understand it in a different way, but in the end, we're all praising the same deity, whether it's him or her, or no label at all. That's my first question. My second question is, what is your beliefs on believing that everything that is not done from love and with love or for love is an illusion, that only love is the real thing that exists? So those two questions.
I believe this, especially between the monotheistic religions, there's really different ways of seeing God and how God saves and how God lives in the world. I think it would be too broad of a stroke to say that we have the same belief in God, obviously, but are we praying to God? One of the blessings of my life is I do this Catholic-Muslim dialogue every month in St. Cloud. It's real, just kind of not intellectual, because I'm not intellectual, but just real kind of meeting people. And one of just a recent meeting we have is we always open up with prayer. We pray for each other's needs, and if I'm praying next to a Muslim, we are praying together, and I guess a lot of theologians might see problems with that, but on a human level, excuse me, on a human level, we are really praying together. We're really praying for each other's good. That might be oversimplistic, but it's experiential, where it's real. I mean, my friend doesn't believe in the Holy Trinity, doesn't believe in Jesus Christ as divine, as the Son of God, as I do. But we're praying together, because we're for each other. So I'm not sure about the second question.
The answer.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So for the, you already gone. There you are. There. The being part of the intermonastic dialogue that we've been part of. I remember at one of the meetings, someone posed the question or said something like, people say that it's, there's only one mountaintop, and that we're just taking different paths to the top of the mountaintop. And he just said, I'd like to see a hand. How many of us actually believe that? And not a single person raised their hand. And then there was a Buddhist monk who posed the question. He says, my understanding is that, the mountaintop doesn't quite work as an analogy for Buddhist anyway, but they said, isn't Christianity, isn't it you're trying to get through the valley of despair? So it's like even the analogies we use don't even tell the truth. So I'll just leave it my answer at that.
So speaking of Muslim-Christian dialogue, as Father Michael just did, there's going to be a program like this on March 28th here. Is that March 28th, yes?
Yeah.
A Thursday, the last Thursday of March, where Danica again will facilitate, and Father Michael will participate, and a Muslim woman from the Muslim-Christian dialogue group that you're involved in, Ayan Omar, will be present, and it'll be a title and subtitle similar to what we have today. Today we have Cultivating Compassion, insights drawn from Buddhist and Benedictine practices. And on March 28th, it'll be Cultivating Community, insights drawn from Muslim and Christian practices. And so I invite you to return for that one. I want to thank Danica and each of our Father Michael and Jotipālo, but you wanted to say something, I think.
I think also in March, Father William Skudlaric and myself are doing Theology on Tap.
Oh,
And it's also going to be with I don't think we know who the Islamic representative will be, but it's another interfaith dialogue as well.
oh, okay, good.
It's great.
Good. So we'll all look for that one. That's the Theology on Tap comes from Campus Ministry. So Danica, do you want to say a final word?
I just want to say thank you all so much for coming, and please keep the conversations. Please keep having them. Have a great evening.
Thank you.